This is Seth Frentheway with Encore Green Environmental.
This is Marvin Nash with Encore Green Environmental.
Thank you both for joining the program today. Very excited to have you on. Talk a little Encore Green Environmental, a little conservation, and what you guys are doing for the oil and gas industry. Let's start off by maybe talking about the genesis of the company a little bit.
Well, Encore Green is a privately owned company by my wife, and it's really interesting. We're actually an agriculture company. We're not an E&P or oil and gas, and the reason we're an agriculture company is because where most of what the industry calls produced water exists is on agriculture land. And we felt like if we were going to create a third option for produced water, which the industry calls it, in the ag world we call it byproduct, but we felt like if we were going to be able to create a pathway to do something else other than pump it down in the ground or leave it in a pond or an evaporation pond, that it was going to have to exist in the presence of the agriculture landowner and stuff. And having worked for EOG for some time as a cost control person and a logistics guy back when oil was $35 and $40 and it was really hard to keep things going, one of our big expenses was getting rid of produced water. So I was constantly negotiating with with midstream and disposal companies, and pretty famous basketball player by the name of Dan Issel said that he owned some interest in some disposal ponds in Wyoming. He said, Marvin, if you'd figure out how to get rid of that water or reuse it, I wouldn't have to charge you as much because I wouldn't have to build new ponds. And don't ever give me a good challenge and walk off, because I immediately went to trying to figure out how to repurpose the industry's problem of produced water. So that was 3 years ago, and that's 2 years ago, and that's kind of how we got started. And that's what we're still working on.
Couple things I wanted to ask you about based on, your history of the company is, well, one is the water innovation. Just, innovation can be a wheel. A lot of people realize it doesn't have to be a computer, although computers have really helped innovation over the last 20 years. But in some cases, it's just figuring out new ways to plant things or, move things around. So talk to me a little bit about innovation, either from a computer or just, what do they call that, feng shui or, that type of thing. Talk to me about the innovation within your industry and how that's really been able to transition you from ag and into energy.
Boy, that's a great question. I wish I'd get that question more often. I'll try to answer it in 30 minutes or less. But
hey, take your time, man. We love passion on this show.
Well, it's and this is where Seth actually came in. The birth of what Seth does came into it. So, produced water is it's the kid from the wrong side of the tracks. Okay, it's the beat down challenge of just day-to-day life. Produced water is a hazmat with an exemption. And just because of what it is was a challenge within itself. The other part of it was, back during the coal bed methane days, they thought they had come up with a way, because that water, the constituencies or, the TDSs and everything are not really off the chart like some of the 60, 80, 120,000 parts per million of salt content or whatever in produced water. And so what I did was I didn't really reinvent. I just reverse engineered the things that did not work. In other words, we have an agronomist that has track records of millions of gallons of water that were put on the ground in a successful manner. But all we see when we have the conversation is the salt grass and and the ground that got contaminated, I hate to use it, not really contaminated, it had salt water put on it, and it didn't function properly. And that's what the media and that's what the world became aware of. And so what were the problems with coal bed methane? Number one was there was so much money floating around, everybody got a brand new center pivot. Everybody was trying to get rid of millions of gallons of water, and the oil and gas companies were doing that, so they put too much water on too few acres. Well, I was raised in South Texas, graduated in 1973 from Edinburgh High School. In 1972, one of my FFA speech in the state public speaking contest was about conservation. And what are we going to do in the year 2000 when we have depleted our land and we're asking our ranchers to do more and produce more? So this had been something that I had talked about and thought about forever and ever and ever. So it wasn't a matter of reinventing, but it was a matter of figuring out what didn't work and making it work. And so I guess in a way, I guess that is part of reinventing. So I had to redesign the entire thought process. So now I have this water that's got a bad reputation. So how do we rehabilitate it? So the challenge got to be, how do we create traceability? So in the agriculture world, the mom or the dad or the man or the lady buying the steak or buying the produce or buying the whatever they're going to eat, they want to know where it came from and how it was raised. So we've created traceability. And part of that came about from the milk problems that we had in Canada many, many years back. But all of the technology was already there for the traceability. In other words, I can buy a cantaloupe from Walmart this afternoon, I can eat it, and I can get sick, and I can go to the hospital at 3 in the morning, and they'll ask me what I ate, and I'll tell them. And they'll say, well, that cantaloupe could have been contaminated. Where did you buy it from? Well, I bought it from Walmart. Well, which Walmart? Well, I bought it from the Walmart in Cheyenne. The old one or the new one? The one on the interstate or the one down on Bell Range? And I can identify all these things. Well, you know what they can do? They can go back to the packing house or to the produce shed. They can go back to the temperature of the refrigerator where the Walmart was kept. They can find out what truck it was hauled in. They can find out what field it came out of. And they can do all of this in probably 48 to 72 hours. And I said, okay, here's my answer. I have to do the same thing with the water. So that's where Seth came into play with creating the software that creates an entire pathway of traceability. Because we have to satisfy the consumer that we're using safe water. So that was the scientific data process. And I'll kind of let Seth comment on what all he's done, and then Jason will get back to, I'm sure we'll get to the cost and the affordability. But, you know, we can take a calf, a bovine calf that is born, and we can tell the consumer everything that calf consumed up until the time it was turned into the steak that we ate. We can track our chickens. We can track our eggs. We can track, you know, I can get sick and go to the hospital and they can draw my blood and they can tell what I drank and what I didn't drink. So I just felt like if we're going to, and I shouldn't say if we're going to, because we're already accomplishing this. We've already done the pilot. We've already created the software. If we're going to solve this problem, we have to be transparent to the consumer. I get kind of tickled and frustrated and aggravated with E&P companies at the same time. I'll go talk to them and I say, look, we want to take this water, we want to clean it up, we want to regenerate it, we want to put it on the ground, and we'll release you of the liability. Well, let because of there's liability. Well, either the water's okay or the water isn't okay. And you can't have it both ways. I come from a rodeo background. You know, I was a professional rodeo clown for 30 years. And when we would deal with animal welfare issues, for many years we said, oh, no, you can't go back behind the chutes. You can't look back there. And then we learned that what we had to do was we had to say, come on, let me show you. Let me show you the mama to this bucking horse, and let me show you this calf. And we had to have transparency. And so we advocate that we have to do the same thing with the water. We can no longer hide behind the fact that it's a hazmat with an exemption. We can clean this water, and it can it not only be put to a good purpose, it has to, because one of these days we may run out of aquifer water. But I'll let you ask Seth the questions about the computer side of it, the technical side of it, because he can address those better than I can.
You bet. Thank you, Marvin Nash. We're going to transition here to Seth. Is it Frentheway?
Frentheway.
Okay.
Yeah, Frentheway.
Right. I did get it right.
The
okay.
Respelling of the old Dutch word.
Frentheway. Okay, great. The question I was going to ask Marvin Nash as the owner of the company, but this actually might make more sense to you, Seth, which is we've had John Gibson from One Oak on our program, and Harold Ham from Continental Resources, James Volker from Whiting, even Lee Tillman from Marathon Oil. And I'm not saying that to name drop. I mean, I am, but I'm not. The reason I bring it up is because these are leaders in the industry who have all said there's a paradigm shift that's happened in the industry. The horizontal flushing, which used to be called hydraulic fracturing, but we call it horizontal flushing here. It changed the industry. And then you go to the HR departments, and boy, I tell you what, big data has changed the way HR departments do things. So when I take a look at the different silos and pillars within each different each different department, this is exactly why you got brought in, Seth, is because Marvin saw the signs that the paradigm shift was happening, and here you are bringing in that new technology that is going to change how we view things. And I wrote down reinvent water. And that's essentially what you guys have done.
Yeah, I think that we've just really reinvented the way to use water and repurpose it. And to be clear, I don't want to, steal anybody's thunder. I've really come in and just tried to help facilitate what Marvin's vision was and is. And really, it comes down to a patent pending process that Marvin has developed called conservation by design. And so the software programs and some of the technology we're utilizing to track that, to document it, to collect and analyze all the different data that's going to be coming in with that process is where I kind of come in. But I think one of the big paradigm shifts, at least as far as what we are looking at in land application of water, Marvin mentioned in the past they had the coal bed methane days, where we tried to look at what could we have done better. And really the paradigm shift, as I see it a lot, was that the shift was that we went to focus on what the soil needed and not necessarily just, some of the opinions or science-based opinions, don't get me wrong. But we really thought that we ought to look at the soil and ask the soil what it needed. And then we clean the water to fit the soil. And then we needed to have a way to be able to track all that once we put the water on the ground. What's happening with the soil? How much moisture does it have? What is the salinity in it? What are the nitrogen contents? We need to be able to monitor that so that, what good is being able to track and trace all this stuff if you don't know where you put it and what the effects were. So we have created a system to be able to track all that from cradle to grave. So we would take, where did the water come from? What were the constituencies in the water? We test all that stuff. And then we look and we say, okay, well, what parameters do we need to clean this water to? And that's where we go and we ask the soil. We'll get the soil samples, and then we clean that water to match the soil, which also includes different regulatory parameters that we've had to work very hard and diligently with regulators to develop. Wyoming is the closest, really, and we just got some pathways working forward with the state of Wyoming, and so we've made some really good headway there. But as we've developed and worked through this, we've been able to alleviate a lot of the concerns that environmentalists have voiced. Marvin didn't just reinvent, how to put the water on the ground. What we really needed to do is reframe the conversation. And Marvin started that conversation, and our communications director, Jeff Holder, out of California, has been really influential in helping us to make sure that we're explaining this in a simple way that everybody can understand, and start kind of directing the conversation in ways that make sense to everybody. I mean, what we're dealing with, Marvin mentioned we're an agriculture company, but we're an agriculture company who's trying to have conversations with energy companies, with regulators, and with environmentalists, and everybody speaks a different language. And all of this can be such a benefit to everybody's wheelhouse of expertise or concern. And we're trying to help facilitate that discussion, and then actually put to action what these ideas and the solutions that we're finding to the concerns that everybody has voiced throughout all these conversations. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. Our website that we use for tracking all of it is called Ag Water Soil Solutions, agwatersoilsolutions.com. It's still in somewhat of a beta phase where we're adding on and bolting on different aspects of our traceability. But all of the information that's on there will be public will be put out there public for anybody who wants to go see it, so that transparency is there. If you were to look on that website, you'll see that there's areas on maps that are identified that show. These are all, and some of these on here are sample examples, but you will show where the water was applied, where it came from, the batching, everything. One of the things that we've able to kind of help facilitate too is designing some of these projects. I mean, we mentioned that the name of the patent pending process is Conservation by Design, and the reason it's named that is because every project is unique, and so every project's going to be developed in a little bit different way, but always in the same way that it's going to be designed to fit the needs of the soil. And so this one of the things on this website that we've done is we've taken information that we can get from the states, from the oil and gas commissions from the state, different states who are collecting how much produced water is produced and where. And so we can have the ability to go in, for example, in the state of Wyoming, you go in on the site and you select the state of Wyoming, and you put in your section, township, and range that you want to know, find out information on. And that section, township, and range comes up. It will tell you how much water is produced out of that section. It will tell you the operators that are operating within that section. And then it will actually convert the water increments from barrels produced to gallons, acre feet, and acre inches. Again, facilitating that shift in language between agriculture, from the agriculture side, in the producing side. So those are some of the things that we're actually trying to facilitate and are doing, and we're excited to tell people about it.
I wanted to ask about the water numbers, and then also I wanted to make sure I asked Marvin Nash about the ag energy connection and just kind of some of the background there that led you into it. One of the top, I don't know, first 4 or 5 stories I did was on how farmers and oil and ranch and gas people seem to get along pretty well for the most part, the ones that seem to work together. So I wanted to ask you about that. But before I get into that relationship, I did want to ask about the water numbers in the Bakken, in the Permian, both the number 1 and number 2 basins, came out in the last 3-4 years and said they're going to need 20, 50, 70 times more water than what they first anticipated 5 years ago. Are you guys kind of aware of that, the numbers anywhere from 10 times to 70 times, depending on what part of the shale play you're in, and then, just the sheer demand for water. So I look at what you guys are doing as your timing is pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I'll go ahead, Mother.
Well, I was just going to say, what's that company, Seth? 3B, B3?
B3. D3, and in fact, he mentioned that company that I think you were sitting next to on the panel when we met you over at the Energy Expo.
Yeah,
Jason.
They came to New Mexico and they came up with some numbers. And even if they repurposed every barrel of water that's coming out of the ground to refrac with, they're still going to have 90% or 93% of it that has to be disposed of. So what our computer data allows us to do is to do a 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 year agriculture prediction based on the amount of water coming out of the ground. So priority one is the water that comes out needs to be cleaned up, reconditioned, primarily, number one, to go back for fracking. That way we're not taking fresh water out of the aquifer. So let's repurpose 100. Let's figure out how to repurpose 100% of that. Then whatever's left, the rancher can put to beneficial use, making sure that it's cleaned to the right constituency and parameters, and it can go back to grow grass, row crops, and our newest add-on is creating healthy soil to create carbon capture and carbon sequestration. And that part of what our company is doing is just taking off like a spaceship. But we got to back up, because you mentioned some really heavy hitters in the energy industry with Ham and just John, all of them. The one thing that we had to come up with was, if you're going to go talk to a major E&P, at the end of the day, they're usually publicly traded. They have a responsibility to their investors and to their shareholders. There's only 4 numbers that you can talk about when you talk about water. What is the cost of trucking? What is the cost of infrastructure? What is the cost of the disposal down into the well or into the pond? And what is the cost of buying new water? And if you add those 4 numbers up, if you cannot clean, repurpose, and get rid of their water within the capacity of those 4 numbers, then you're wasting your time talking to them. And that's just a reality. That's a fact. So if trucking's $2 and infrastructure is $1 million a mile, and disposal into an open pit disposal or into a disposal well is 30 to 40 cents, and buying new water is 40 to 70 cents a barrel, if you can't add all those numbers up and be less money than what they're spending, there's no need for them to make a change. So the one thing that we had to figure out how to do was how to make it fit within that fiduciary process. Here was the problem. The companies cleaning the water were saying, oh, yeah, we can do it, but it's $7 a barrel or $5 a barrel or $6 a barrel. We had to figure out who owned most of those companies, and we had to tell some of the major players, y'all just go over there to keep doing refinery work. Quit bugging the oil and gas companies, because until you can clean water for anywhere from 17 cents to $2.50 or $3, depending on what the trucking looks like, you're wasting the energy industry's time. Because they have no reason to clean water just to clean water. They don't need to practice. You know? They need to repurpose that water to meet the need that you're talking about, that 10 to 70 times. But at the end of the day, they have to be able to do that within a fiduciary component that fits their business model. Now, we've been able to identify those goals, and we are working with some technologies that actually help us reach those goals. But before you start any of the conversation, before you can do conservation by design, you have to take into the reality of what the companies, the E&Ps, are spending at this point in time. Now, one of the things that we have added on, thanks to some of our software and to some of Seth's developments and stuff, is we can now take and get a benchmark on putting that water on arid ground There's no ground available that produces more carbon capture than arid ground because the grass is closer to the ground. It has less root depth than anything else. And when you start increasing that, it has more potential. It has more potential to grow grass better than evergreen trees or corn crops or whatever. And you can put it in a set-aside for years at a time so you can actually create a carbon capture. So one of the interesting things for us is the company that gets demonized the most for creating air quality issues and for just being in the fossil fuel business actually is a solution to our air quality problem. And we're just now have figured out how to make that a reality, but the data and stuff, and it's through what Jeff Holder identified as our Just Add Water initiative. So you partner with your farmer or your rancher, you put together a catastrophic management plan. If you're in the agriculture, and there's a lot of moving parts here, and it can get really confusing, but if you're in the agriculture business and you got 200 head of cows and you're raising 300 bales of hay to get them through the winter, and you either hit a drought or get a really long winter, what breaks the farmer or rancher is not having to get rid of the cows. It's when I got to replace those cows because I didn't have enough feed to get them through the winter or through the tough times. But if I take the water that's available because of where the oil and gas wells are, now I can solve that problem. But along the way, I can actually quantify based on white papers that have been done, research that's been done by Duke and Colorado State and in Edmonton and just several different universities. I can actually take that water and create carbon capture by creating a healthy soil and a healthy plant. Have we got you confused enough yet? Jeremy, are you?
No, no, not yet. I did want to circle back to the carbon sequester, the carbon capture. So I'm glad you brought that up again because that is one of the fastest growing areas in the energy world. I'm not sure about the other world. I mean, it's its own industry. I get it, but in North Dakota, they've pretty much gone with academia to go up at the University of North Dakota. They have an energy and environmental research center up there, and they're doing a lot with the CO2 capture, working with Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, Congressman Armstrong. So there's a lot of that happening in North Dakota. Talk to me about the private sector on what's going on there. I mean, you say it's really growing on your side of things too, huh?
Well, yeah, and the Department of Energy, which funded the project in North Dakota, we actually got a little email we're pretty proud of that they said, whatever we can do from the Department of Energy to help you, we're here to help and support what you're doing. The private sector side is you have all of this grassland, millions and millions and millions of acres, and we're not a cap and trade component, but we are a volunteer market component. And to be able to do those things, you have to have an exchange, a registry, and a protocol. And Seth has been putting a lot of time and energy to develop those. Probably the only other way to avoid that would be to go to a cryptocurrency type trade of carbon credits and those kind of things. But the reality of it is Mother Earth provides the process and the procedure. We learned about it in 6th and 7th grade. It was called photosynthesis. We all learned about it in physical science. All we have to do is just add water. So you have to have that relationship with the provider of the water or the producer of the water, which is the oil and gas or the energy company. You connect that to the farmer rancher who has the acreage. You grow your grass and improve your grass quality by improving your soil health, and all of a sudden, bingo, you're creating more carbon capture. You can mob graze sections of land or acreages, and now the cows walk on the improved grass, and so you're releasing more oxygen. So all of these different entities, agriculture, energy, environmental, science, they all were there Encore Green Environmental, through conservation by design, just figured out the way to put them all together.
Sure, you're just layering things in and putting it together. Hey, Seth, how much of this is a simulation process in the beginning stages?
How do you mean simulation?
Well, it just seems like there's so many ways to use simulators these days, because really what Marvin Nash is talking about is, layering in knowledge from the science side, layering in knowledge from environment side, layering in knowledge from energy and ag, and he's saying this isn't new here. We're just putting pieces of the puzzle together, and we got a new color on the Rubik's Cube side or something like that. I didn't know if you have a simulation process to see how it looks ahead of time, or if it's just if it's pretty cut and dry just off the numbers.
Well, yeah, a lot of it, is science-based and kind of cut dry off the numbers. I think what we find is that when Marvin's saying that all the stuff was there, all the technology, all the know-how was there, I think what we're finding is just like in anywhere else, Jason, people get kind of blinders in their own lane and they don't think outside of it. And so when you're kind of getting into the mode of reverse engineering things, you're looking at it just from a little bit different perspective, and that allows you to kind of see all the puzzle pieces on the table and how can they actually work together rather than being a puzzle piece and how do I step out of that box. And so I think that's really what's gone on here. And if I understand your question, but maybe a little more direct to your question as far as maybe simulating carbon sequestration or predicting the carbon capture potential along those lines, if that's what you're meaning. If it's not, this is still important to cover.
No, it is. It is. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But Colorado State University has developed a program called Comet Farm. I first learned about this from a fellow out at the Grasslands Research Center named Justin Durner here just outside of Cheyenne. He works with ARS and NRCS. And we've been working a lot with those folks, making sure we get this right again. And so anyway, they developed a program that allows you to, based off of the white paper science that they've done, they go into a lab or whatever and then do some tests and say, or maybe a small section of ground somewhere and do some tests and study it. And then off of those models, they'll build a computer model that they can come in and make predictions now. You enter in your parameters for whatever your project looks like, what is the baseline, and then it can give you projections based off how much your precipitation was and what type of plant life was there and how long that happened. And they can give you those types of predictions. So that's there. The problem, and I don't necessarily say it's a problem, it's almost an exciting opportunity. Around the world, especially in arid grasslands, a lot of the carbon sequestration techniques have been implemented. They haven't been able to add water on the scale that we're able to do in arid grasslands, simply because they haven't had it. But because we now can say, okay, this is how much water we're going to have in a specific area over a specific period of time, you can now come up with some real solid projections of what to expect going down the road. And that's helped us with our carbon sequestration efforts because, as you may be aware, when folks are coming in to offset their GHG output, they're oftentimes having to invest money into a project in advance, and then the carbon capture needs to be realized over X amount of time, or there's either a penalty or some type of balancing out mechanism that takes place. And so with being able to have the prediction of the water, knowing what's been produced there, how long, and being able to project what will be for how long, we're able to apply the water when the ground needs it rather than just waiting for rain. So we have a lot of benefits that allow us to make those predictions based off of the science that we've been getting from the work the other universities and stuff have really kind of laid the groundwork. Again, a lot of this stuff it's been out there, just nobody's really seen how to do it. One of the protocols that's been really interesting in my mind and would apply really well here in the rangelands in Wyoming is it's a rangeland management protocol through the Verified Carbon Standard that this is a national standard or an international standard. So if we were to follow those same protocols in developing our carbon capture, then those methodologies and calculations have all been verified and peer reviewed and approved through the carbon standards. So, there's pathways to move forward, even though that it hasn't necessarily been done in the same context or perspective that we're looking at doing it, simply because we have the water. Does that answer that, or am I missed something there for you?
No, I'm following you. To me, in my mind, I'm going anything that moves us more towards a permaculture concept. I love, because I've been following different forms of agriculture and different types of growing, and from rainforest to Wyoming grasslands, and it seems like anytime you can get that natural ecosystem built within its own area. You guys mentioned earlier about the different types of water. I look at at land the same way, and so do energy companies. And so maybe they got to look at water that way too. Is that it's so specific? Every 10 feet, you need a new study. It seems like nowadays, because there's so much that goes into water. But anyway, yeah, I'm following you. You guys are just tickling my mind a little bit. It's a bubblegum for the mind session here. I love it. So
yeah, I mean the stuff that we're pursuing is a high level. You got to be able to think, kind of broad, and we're covering a lot of different areas. Like I say, trying to pull all these different pieces together. But it's pretty exciting. And to your point, to the types of carbon capture methodologies that actually improve our environment. I mean, one of the things that we have, the position we've taken is, and there's an article that if you go on to Encore Green Environmental.com or even BeneficialUseWaterAlliance.com, we can talk about that maybe a little later. But one of the things that Jeff Holder has helped us communicate is that we're really not on anyone's side. We're not on we have a lot of tension. All these different groups of people that we work with sometimes obviously don't get along. I don't think that's too much of a secret. Sometimes they butt heads, right? And so what we've done is take a step back and say, look, we're not on the energy guys' side. We're not trying to put you out of business either. We're not on the environmentalist side. We love the environment, but we're not trying to be anti-anybody. And so, regulation, we know it needs to be there. We don't want it to be overreach. Our focus is on the soil. We need to make sure that we're doing our proper stewardship of the soil. And so that goes along with carbon sequestration too. There's some people of the opinion that pulling as much carbon out of the sky is not going to make any difference in as far as the global warming. To us, you know what? We're about improving soil health, and along with that comes carbon sequestration. So we're looking about solutions, not about arguing of the ideological stuff. And so that's one of the things that I liked too. To your point, was that we're really improving soil health, and you know what? Maybe that conversation about carbon being pulled out of the air at some point if we find out that was never really needed, or maybe it was really needed. Either way, we win. And the ag producer really wins when they have improved soil health. So, it's a pretty exciting thing, and being a part of water in any respect is going to have some pretty far-reaching implications just because it's so fundamental to everything.
Marvin Nash and Seth Frentheway with us with Encore Green Environmental, Conservation by Design. All right, I want to layer in a couple things here. We're talking about layering in. You guys... We're talking high-level conversation here, and I'm loving it. So let's. I'm going to layer in the paradigm shift of the oil and gas industry. We talked about the different departments. I believe that the oil and gas industry needs to reinvent their PR. They do. Seth, you and I at the Energy Expo in Gillette, we talked about the millennials and some of the misconceptions and some of the the reputation that they seem to have gotten all of a sudden. And then also, I wanted to fold in Boulder, Austin, and Fargo. The Boulder, Colorado is, I heard that over and over at the conference. I've heard it about Austin. And then, of course, being in North Dakota, the same thing with Fargo, which is they're getting control of the governments. These cities that are labeled liberal cities that win awards for being the most liberal cities and nations and states are winning these awards. Now, when I grew up, the energy industry wasn't political. So that's an entirely new thing for me within the last 10 years. But I think it has to do with the paradigm shift of the image as well. Seth, what we talked about with the millennials, The way I want to contextualize it is this, that I just got off a conversation not even an hour ago with a gentleman about millennials, and I said, listen, here's what we need to understand about millennials is that the way that they are raised is everything's the best and everything's the worst. And then they got to go out in the world, and they're trying to figure out that not everything is the best and not everything is the worst. There's some things involved in the world of gray out there. And so they're trying to find their identity. They're being told that they're the best at creating industry and they're ruining every industry. So, but what I have noticed is once they get in the oil and gas industry, they seem to really like the oil and gas industry. They seem to really all of a sudden not be a protester against it or have this conception that it's the evil fossil fuel world. I've seen it for 10 years now before my own eyes. You know, talk to me a little bit about just kind of what I said, because this is a tough conversation to have here, because the energy industry needs to reinvent its image. I mean, look at it. It got banned in Colorado. It's got passed in Oregon. Wyoming did a BLM ban. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are having the public conversation about banning fracking. And the new Green Deal ends the industry in 10 years. And so I look at it like it's a very hard conversation to have, but it almost is one that needs to be had. So anyway, I got to get off my soapbox, guys. I'm sorry. I saw an opportunity and I pounced.
I'm going to let Seth answer you, and then I'm going to jump in because I don't disagree with you at all, but I'll explain after Seth kind of, because Seth's that younger person. I'm old, you know, but hey, I'll share some stuff with you to address your concerns.
Hey, Marvin, in the industry, we call that a tease.
Go ahead.
All right, hey Seth, go ahead. I mean, because Seth, you and I had a pretty good conversation about the millennials at the expo.
Yeah. So a little bit of background, Marvin. I'm actually a millennial. I'm 41, and I guess I'd be categorized into Generation X. But we're kind of that group of people that nobody talks about, you know. And sometimes I still find myself in being a millennial and very much engaged with them. My story is a little bit different. I somehow ended up at the age of 41 with my youngest son being 16 years old, and I've got a total of 9 kids. So a lot of those kids, you know, they're all millennials. I mean, and so when I look at some of the things that they're facing when they start to go out into the world, my perspective as a dad and you know, I'm a Midwest kid, right? So I grew up different than I'm sure a lot of people on either, you know, Sodom or Gomorrah side of the country did. And so, but in a lot of ways we're still the same. But I think the message that my kids seem to sometimes get confused by once they start to go out on their own or trying to find their own way, kick them out of the nest, so to speak, is that I think the message they receive while they're growing up in schools and such is that there's a confused message between the individual and groups. And I think that sometimes the message that is meant well with regard to how my kids relate in groups comes out to be thinking that they have no ability to do things on their own. They can't just go choose to participate in something. And that goes back to what you were mentioning with the oil field, and really you didn't mention just yet, but I remember in your talk, and I thought it was exactly right, that the energy industry, when you go out and see how it's operating, is very much a choice function. It's a capitalistic endeavor. You need to be an entrepreneur. You choose to participate. Nobody is going to give you a handout. Nobody's going to make you do anything. And I think that type of worldview or perspective on entrepreneurship specifically, or taking care of yourself, self-independence, that's something that I think really speaks deeply to the human nature. And I think that's why they really appeal to it. And I think, you know, I mean, we can go into a whole other philosophical discussion about, you know, do we start going towards altruism and these kind of things, or socialism, and what's the difference? But I think that capitalism right now is just the best system that has been created to foster mutual exchange and cooperation between people. I think that if everybody would decide of their own free will and choice to participate in, an altruistic society, that would be great. I think there's some human nature things about that are a little bit problematic. But at any rate, I think that's what that real appeal is. I'm going into the energy industry. And look, one of the things I was telling you too is I don't think millennials are as dumb and as lost in their ability to choose, or kind of just robotic. I don't think that they're as much that way as they are presented. And I think that's frustrating to a lot of millennials. And I think it's almost insulting, but they don't know necessarily exactly what to do with it. And then when you find somebody goes out into and it has opportunity to do something for their own life, and pursue the American dream, is really what that is. They gravitate to it, and I think that in a lot of ways we're missing the boat by downplaying millennials. To be honest with you, yes, we see that some of the crazies are out there, and they get a lot of attention, and because that's what the media does. They're looking for whatever can get the next clickbait. But I don't think that's real representative of any one category in the populace, and that includes millennials. So that's my little short spiel on it.
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed and I've written down the last couple of weeks is the energy industry seems to enable opportunity, not entitlement. And
that's right.
What you just said really kind of validated. I've been writing that down in interviews as we've been having these conversations. Marvin Nash, you teased that you might have a bigger soapbox than me. We only got 10 minutes left in the interview, so can you make it done in 10 minutes?
I'll get it done. So, I sometimes don't hesitate to tell everybody that for 30 years I was a professional rodeo clown, because when you do that for a living, people often say, "Well, couldn't you get a real job?" I mean, what's wrong? And for me, rodeo was an industry that I worked in. My wife and I created two nationally known educational programs. One called "Don't Clown Around with Drugs," the other one called "Bullying Hurts." And after doing that for 30 years, I left and did get a real job with EOG. After I left the public service sector of life. But I didn't realize at the time that my rodeo history was preparing me for this water endeavor in this manner. And it came to me after going to a meeting in Austin with Scott Anderson and a couple of Environmental Defense Fund folks. The 30 years I spent in the rodeo industry, I had a unique situation that I went back east an awful lot, and I went from coast to coast. Not a lot of stuff, in Wyoming, the mainstream of the agriculture world. But I probably had every conversation with every animal rights and every animal welfare person that you could ever have. And I had to learn that they truly have a passion about animal welfare. And they truly have a passion about protecting our environment from fossil fuels and coal and those kind of things. And they specifically believe that their passion will lend itself to making and helping us have a better society. But what we learned in the Western industry and the rodeo industry was how to find common ground. And the energy industry sometimes says, look, if it wasn't for us, we'd be buying oil from overseas and we would be not be energy independent. And that would affect our national security. There's a lot of truth to that. But at the end of the day, we're energy independent and we're protecting our national security from all of our citizens in our world and in our United States. So we have to learn how to find the common ground and have solutions. That's why we say conservation by design and Encore Green are a win-win-win-win. If you're going to tell me that you want clean air and that you want to have a positive effect on our air quality and climate change, if that's the verbiage that you want to use, if you truly want to do that, then you're going to help me find a way to put this water on the ground to grow more grass, to create more carbon capture. And if you're not going to help me do that, then I'm going to have a hard time believing that you're really looking for a solution. What you're really looking for is the solution that you want without helping us find the solutions that are available. We learned in the rodeo industry, we used to catch a lot of conversations about what now are called rodeo athletes. And Chad Berger, the Berger family from North Dakota, has raised some of the greatest rodeo athlete bucking bulls to ever walk the face of the earth. But we learned that we created a program called Born to Buck. One of the largest standing ovations ever given in rodeo history was at the Houston Stock Show and Rodeo. They turned out 10 baby bucking horses that for 4 or 5 years were going to be rodeo athletes. They turned out their mamas, they turned out their grandmas, and they turned out their great-grandmas, and then they discussed the necessity of the breeding programs and the help and the care that were given to these equine athletes. And we started changing the conversation, and we started finding the common ground. Don't come to Encore Green telling me that you want to create a clean air quality society and then say, but no, the oil and gas company can't be the one to do it. But if you're in the oil and gas business, don't come to me and say, those people over there trying to shut us down, they shouldn't have a voice. No, they should. And it's our responsibility to show them how and what and why we can do and how we can do these things. And what happens is the Boulders and the Austins and the Fargos, their voice gets heard over and above the energy industry's voice because they do have the voting power. So let's change the conversation. Let's go to Austin, let's go to Boulder, let's go to Fargo, and let's say you got millions of acres. Would you be opposed to giving the oil and gas company a tax credit for cleaning up this water and putting it to beneficial use so that we could grow more grass and have a healthier soil so that we can then create more carbon capture? Because if that's what you're opposed to and you're just totally opposed to fossil fuel, then environmentalists, you are no longer a part of the solution. Now you're a part of the problem. But I understand your passion for solving this problem. But let's figure out how to do it together. We all have a responsibility. Yeah, does the oil and gas company, are they a little brazen? Yeah, they are. You know, if 1D8 doesn't work in the old oil and gas industry, we just got 2. And if 2 didn't work, we got 3. But we've had to change that of saying, well, we just have the 1/8. Let's figure out how to use it then. Maybe we got to go around this side of the road instead of just going straight down the middle. But that's what the Just Add Water and Conservation by Design allows us to do. It allows us predictability. We believe that the minute that you buy the minerals for a lease from under the ground, you need to call us so we can start putting together your water program. And we think that's where the changes start coming. Then you can go to the city council and say, yeah, we're going to drill these wells, but here's what the water is going to be used for, and here's the purpose it's going to be put to. Many people that have a problem with water and oil and gas, they don't understand when you say, well, good golly, it's only $2 a barrel to clean the water. Well, the well made 1 barrel of oil, but it made 7 barrels of water, so that $2 actually turned into 14. But we only got $55. So if we only got $54, the math would be easier, and we took 14 out, that leaves me 40. But it cost me $36 a barrel just to drill the well. So now I've only got a $4 profit. Well, you know what? It might be better just not to drill those wells. But nobody ever sits back and explains those components to create a solution. Does that make sense to you?
Makes sense.
Through our 10 minutes where we need to be?
You bet. So I got to wrap her up here. Go ahead and give out your information. How people get in touch with you if somebody wants to find out more information.
Sure, Seth. You can. I couldn't hear him again, but if you'll give him all that information, or we'll have Jeff send it to him. It's just EncoreGreenEnvironmental.com or Conservation by Design or Ag Water Soil Solutions. Those are kind of the wheels the spokes that hold the wheel together.
Yep, EncoreGreenEnvironmental.com will have the contact information on there. It goes over everything we've talked about here, and there's even some videos on there that Jeff Holder put together to make it real simple to understand what the process is for conservation by design. So we really